Hey friends, welcome to another Monday Musing. Today's topic is brought to us by Mr. DeFacia, who asks, what strategies do you use to make hex crawling or wilderness exploration engaging? I've got a handful of thoughts on this topic that I felt might be worth going through. For one, it is a really huge topic, which seems to be the theme of every kind of question that we get asked here. But some things I like to think about when talking wilderness exploration and trying to keep it exciting and interesting. Obviously, variety is kind of the spice of life, and so it's really important that when you're having your adventurers traipse across country for a long period of time and you want to sort of try to bring that to life, or when they're slogging through a hex crawl and trying to pick the paths that they're going to do, that you are going to vary not only the difficulty level, but also the variety of the interactions that are going to take place, and particularly the attitude of those encounters. One thing that's a great way to keep stuff in mind is that the variance of pace in your game is really where most of a dungeon master's focus should be. When things are particularly slow, we want to pick it up. When they've been fast for a while, we want to back it back down to give players a little time to breathe and to soak in what's happening. So in general, we want to make sure that we have alternating beats, or if we do have a few that are coming one after another, the same sort of beat, that they are rising in tension. But players just cannot handle constant rising action. It's why movies have these slow moments after the big action scene, to let everybody decompress. So one thing to keep it engaging is to, just like the rest of your game, focus on the pacing and vary the kinds of encounters that your adventurers are encountering. Another thing that I like to pay attention with when we're doing like an overland travel is that I want to entice my players rather than give my players something. It's a show versus tell sort of thing, like they say in writing, but basically what I want to give is the smallest hint that is possible that might entice my players to choose to go and find something out. Because while we talk about exploration as being one of the three pillars of the game, we don't really have a tremendous amount of advice on how to make it a solid pillar of the game. Really, in Dungeons & Dragons, the solid pillar that we all know is, of course, combat. In the other ones, we need to learn how to integrate those pillars for ourselves. And in the case of exploration, what we need to realize is that it is not exploration for your players to discover something or learn something unless they first were made interested in learning or discovering that thing. While sometimes, yes, we do throw a curveball out there that they didn't see coming and the information is exciting and new and interesting to our players, as a general rule, when dealing with hex crawls and wilderness encounters and long travel sequences, when we want to engage our players in exploration, we want to give them a hint that there's something that they could choose to either ignore or go and investigate. And when they choose to investigate it and then they discover the information on the other end, or that tidbit that was available for them, or even that encounter that they get to engage in, they have chosen to explore, and then their question has been rewarded with an answer and they feel like they are exploring. Another thing that helps to use that particular feature is taking into account the horizon that your characters are capable of seeing on. If they're stuck down in a valley in a heavy forest and their vision is absolutely minimal, it's a lot harder for them to have enticing opportunities, but it does make a great place for an ambush scene, obviously. Whereas if they're up on the ridge lines or climbing over mountains and they can see afar off, we can tantalize them with all sorts of little distant discoveries, because their field of vision is further and the horizon is farther out. Choosing to vary those distances, just like varying pace, is a great way to engage our players and trying to give them an opportunity to choose their path so that they feel like they're a part of this world that we're trying to portray to them, instead of just feeling like they're going from one scripted encounter to another scripted encounter. One thing that you need to pay attention to when it comes to wilderness encounters is that you are leaning into the tier of play that your characters are in. For instance, though at first level, it is important that we run encounters that help players to be grounded in the world and to realize that there are a lot of things that normal people have to suffer through. By the time we reach the third tier of play, those kinds of things just don't apply to the superheroes that our players have become, and that's okay. So they should encounter things that are trivial to them and trivially pass over them, but generally we get a lot less screen time for the torrential downpour after 5th level when the players have Leomund's tiny hut to protect them than we would if at 1st level that same thing happened. If we want to keep it real, we can often throw in time crunch and alternate victory conditions, things that need to be accomplished in order to spice it up still, but paying attention to what tier of play and what abilities your characters have is important, because we can't put the focus on things that they should be able to swiftly and easily overcome. So as they grow, we want to grow our adventure with them. One thing that I like to do when detailing out like a random encounter table, or even just using a pre-published random encounter table, is to find ways to add a hook or a tie-in to the story as a whole, or to one of these side quest stories that I've got detailed out, so that the random encounter is still a random encounter that doesn't necessarily tie into exactly what the players are interested in right now, but perhaps it delivers just a little bit of background information, or a little hook or a little tie, one little something that pulls towards the rest of the story. Because it can feel like the one and only one encounter that you have while you're traveling from point A to point B can be literally just a roadblock that the DM put in to waste some time and or make it feel like there was some kind of danger between point A and point B. What we want to do is add in hooks and ties to everything around us, to one or another story that we have, or even to a story that we haven't yet created. If that hook gets a bite, we can always work towards making that story more important, because we should always be paying attention to what the players are interested in and delivering more of that rather than delivering what we already had in mind for ourselves. A final thought that I've used a couple of times to some success is to plan a journey as if it were a small adventure itself. Obviously, in a hex crawl, that's a completely different situation, but in just a wilderness travel scene from one point of the story to another, if we plan that journey as if that journey was an adventure, then we can create a compelling and exciting and interesting experience across that distance. One of the ways that I've used to make that a simple proposition is John 4 over at Role Playing Tips newsletter, and I think he has a YouTube page too, but John 4's 5-room dungeons. He's become kind of famous for the 5-room dungeon, and it works great for detailing out your wilderness exploration. Basically, it's 5 different scenes or 5 different situations that you're going to try to set up for the wilderness trek, one of which is a guardian. The second one is the puzzle or RP situation. There's a trick or a setback, a climax, and of course, a reward. In a wilderness travel scene, the reward is usually getting where you go, though of course some treasure along the way never hurts, right? The Guardian is the reason why average folk don't make this same trek. It's the reason why you're an adventurer and you're allowed to go running around in the woods, and the average commoner hides in their room for the rest of their life and never goes further than a mile or so from their little farm. The puzzle or RP encounter is an opportunity to add in some kind of a quandary about which path they're going to take, or a traveler along the way, or any other option that comes along in your mind for how you could engage the players in a slightly different scene. The trick or setback might be that one of those previous situations went wrong, or perhaps there were two perfect paths and this one just happens to have another situation on there. Perhaps it's another fight if you haven't had a combat recently, depending on the kind of beat that you're on, but there's tons of options to provide a small setback, a washed out road, a fallen log that your cart can't get past, etc., etc., etc. The climax of the encounter is the penultimate situation to the reward of arriving at the situation. Perhaps it's coming over that ridgeline and seeing it down ahead, but perhaps there's some kind of a twist to block the path, or maybe you've been seeing a trailing of creatures or hearing the sounds of wolves afar off during your spooky trek through the woodlands, and the climax is when the lycanthrope with a pack of regular wolves finally jumps up over the ridge line and finishes his hunt that has been ongoing for the last couple of days. Using John For's 5-room dungeon method to plan out a trek, and you don't have to include these rooms in the exact order that he sets them up there either, just as a so's you know. Having that framework allows you to build out an interesting travel scene from where you are to where you might be. So, Mr. DeFacia, I hope that answers your question to some degree. If you have further questions, drop them in the comments. And if any of you have found great ways to make wilderness exploration exciting and interesting, please help us out in the comments section so that we can all learn together. Because ultimately, the whole point here is for us to get better at playing Dungeons & Dragons. Thanks for watching. Happy adventuring.